So much.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here, and thanks for all of you who've kind of been participating throughout this process and sharing your ideas and suggestions. Now that we've got the first batch of changes approved and ready to start implementing here in a couple weeks, I really hope you see some of the suggestions you made over the last couple years reflected in these actions that have now been approved. I have a PowerPoint presentation, not too different from what I delivered to the governing board over the last couple months. I was hoping maybe to go through that. It'll probably be about 20 minutes, maybe a little longer. And if you're able to kind of hold questions and do a go back on those items, that would probably be ideal. Hopefully I can address some of the questions you may have through the presentation. And we have plenty of time for discussion, Q&A, whatever is most helpful for all of you after I do a little slideshow. So let me give a shot here at sharing my screen and hopefully so I'm going to go to slideshow. If someone could, am I looking good here? Is this showing up for everyone?
Yes, it looks good to me. I can see.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, off we go.
Arlo, this is
Yes.
Matt with TRPA. We're seeing actually the presenter view where it splits it up in your notes. We're seeing both screens.
Okay, let me try something different. How does that still show you in presenter view? I went into slideshow on mine.
It does not. For some reason, your slideshow settings are to show both on the same screen, it looks like.
How does this look?
This is just the edit view. Maybe if you go to slideshow at the top of the panel there, and then try from beginning there and see if that
Is that showing you better? Or are you getting multiples?
we're getting multiples still, and it's pretty small.
I'm sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties. Do you want to try, Jen, or were you seeing it okay? I'm not quite sure why I'm going double here.
Sure, this is Jen. I can try to bring it up from my email. Let me go ahead and do that now.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Arlo, there is a
Sure.
checkbox that you had checked as soon as your screen went away that says presenter mode at the top in the top toolbar, and I think that's what was causing it. You had that checked.
In the Zoom meeting?
No, in the PowerPoint software. In the top ribbon of the toolbar, there's a checkbox for presenter mode. But Jen could also drive it.
Jen, are you pulling up or should I give it another shot?
Arlo, I do have it up now. Let me try to share it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm seeing it, and I think hopefully everyone else is, so we can start talking about ordinances and stuff now. Thank you. If you could advance slide, please, Jen. All right, so what have we been trying to do? This is really an effort focused on improving the permitting system, not really the rules or the regulations or big policy initiative. It's really focusing on process, oftentimes minutia of process. And we're doing that really to better support environmental redevelopment. Redevelopment is a key part of TRPA's strategy for improving water quality and other environmental attributes. But the processes are still difficult. Everything was really set up in a stop development mode early in TRPA's history. And we're trying to transition this into more of a support environmentally beneficial redevelopment type of process. We also wanted to review and update our procedures before really going full steam into a number of technology investments and improvements that we are working on concurrently, so that we're kind of standardizing the procedures we want through the automated systems and not having to change those to reflect better procedures. It's been a good project for me. Really, I'm a consultant. I worked previously with TRPA. I know most of you. And I've really been integrated with the TRPA team, both on this project, and I'm also doing outsource application reviews. So I've gotten a pretty good hands-on feel for what's working smoothly, where there's some bumps in the roads and areas for improvement. We've had a good, strong TRPA team kind of working together to build up these changes over time. And periodic participation from folks like all of you, planning consultants, local agency staff have been closely involved. And also the League to Save Lake Tahoe has really helped steer us to avoid any potential environmental concerns that could be associated with this. So I think we all came to a pretty good package through that process. Next slide, Jen, please. We went through a pretty lengthy process starting in April of 2022. So we're about 18 months, 20 months into this. We started with basic ideas and getting feedback from the community and everyone involved with permitting. Eventually developed what we called an action plan, which went to the governing board and was endorsed, that kind of laid out the priority topics. Then we went back to the board with more detailed proposals in the form of an implementation plan. Also got a unanimous endorsement there. And then kind of lastly, rolled it up into all the details with the code changes, the rule of procedure changes, the fee changes. That was reviewed at 2 governing board meetings, adopted. All of these votes were unanimous, which was pretty encouraging. The governing board's been very supportive of improving our permitting procedures to the extent we can. So now we have a bunch of new codes, a bunch of new rules of procedure, a bunch of new stuff that goes into effect a week from Monday. So we're coming up pretty close. And then the updated fees will go into effect in January. And I'll also touch on some additional improvements that we're working on now. So next slide. So all of the documents that have been adopted, I think there might be some final formatting going on, but they're all available on the website where you see here under the permitting tab and that permitting improvement action plan, the updated code, those 2 summary tables, especially the table of amendment at the top, might be your most helpful. It just lists out the specific changes that have been approved. We have an updated Code of Ordinances and updated rules of procedure, design review guidelines, fee schedule, etc. I also want to point out, and I'll speak to it a little bit, the procedure manual at the bottom. This is an important kind of administrative improvement tool that we also think will be a resource for the general public. That also is available at this spot. When we go live on the 27th, the code and the rules, those will migrate over to where you normally find the code when they go into effect. But for folks preparing applications or wanting to look at this in advance of the effective date, this is where you find it. Next slide, Jen, thanks. Okay, so priority topics. I've really been trying to stay true to the goals and the priority efforts that we're working on. You know, there's no shortage of changes we could look into or different topics we could look at improving, but we've really focused on what was first identified as the real challenge areas, the opportunities to improve, and the areas of focus. So efficiency, consistency, and predictability is big. People want to know what the rules are, know what it's going to take to get an approval, what types of things might not be approved, and make it, as quick as feasible, and minimize delays. Second big priority is to simplify procedures for minor types of applications, small things, and I'll speak to each of these a little more. We have a whole suite of code updates that are really to clarify what the requirements are and to implement and put in code prior interpretations that have been made over the decades, really. There's kind of a history of interpretations being made at TRPA that don't get embedded into the code. And part of our transition here is to try to have the code reflect the full suite of requirements that folks are going to be expected to conform with. Public communication and customer service improvements. We've implemented quite a few of those. We have a few more coming. Staff development and training goes along with that. And funding and staffing has been a real pinch point. So that's really what we're trying to achieve through these specific amendments and just other efforts overall. Next slide, please. So 3 of these priorities really deal with administrative matters. It's not something where you can approve an amendment that will make us more efficient and consistent. So we've developed a whole suite of administrative tools that really focus on these 3 priority areas. Next slide, Jen. First up are customer service tools. We've expanded options for customer service. You can access that online or through our new dedicated customer service staff and customer service phone line, where people should be able to get answers to their inquiries more quickly and more consistently through the dedicated customer service staff. 589-5333 will get you straight to the customer service planner. You can still use the general line as well. We have email inquiries, intake, or the general TRPA. The lobby hours are being expanded. It's on a 4-day-a-week schedule right now, but starting in January, the front lobby at TRPA offices will be open 5 days a week. The website resources. And what I show here at the bottom are expanded kind of formalized procedures to schedule appointments or to schedule a pre-application meeting. If everyone's busy and you want to just get something on calendar to communicate with the planner about a pending application or whatever it may be, it shows you right there on the website where you can schedule those, request those meetings. There's a couple different levels. If it's fairly simple, under a half hour, we can do that. If it's more involved, we can get it off to a more formal pre-application meeting. Next slide, please. So the next we've spent a lot of time on this procedure manual in terms of an administrative improvement, and it is now available for staff to use, for the public. We've started training on it. And what this is intended to be is to have clear written procedures for how TRPA as an organization handles application reviews, code interpretations, customer service matters, a whole suite of really everything, the staff business of running a permitting department. We're trying to document it all in writing, so staff is being as consistent as possible, so our applicants kind of have good expectations that are fairly reflect what they're going to encounter during the permitting process. This is going to be a living document that gets refined over time as issues come up and get addressed. They'll get documented here. Organizationally, the first chapter is really a guide for the public to TRPA permitting. Most of you are pretty well familiar with TRPA and kind of know the process, but for a lot of people it's confusing. And this chapter 1 kind of gives everyone an overview. If they want to, in a half hour, understand how TRPA permitting works, that's where you go. Chapters 2 and 3 are more detailed staff guides. They're kind of written for staff in mind. On how we handle or should be handling application review procedures, compliance and enforcement procedures, and administrative procedures. So this kind of lays out the expectations for everyone doing their business of application reviews. I don't have it on the slide, but I wanted to flag there's an attachment A to this document, which is kind of a code conformance guide, kind of the key topics that are addressed in each of the code chapters, and kind of a checklist of sorts for what staff should be checking while reviewing applications. For applicants who really want to kind of understand the depths of what's going to be looked at, this might be helpful. This is really kind of a cornerstone of a lot of the associated improvements we're working on. Next slide. A few additional administrative improvements. We've moved to using standard templates where all staff will be using the same checklists, the same format for conditional permits, the same list of sample conditions. So hopefully you're going to see increased consistency in what the permits look like, the wording of various conditions, things like that. We have done some organizational improvements and essentially establish a mid-management layer within the department. So Wendy isn't stretched so thin and has more time to focus on management matters. So Tiffany and Allie are key to that. They're each overseeing teams, and that kind of team approach is going to be carried forward. We're more formalizing how how the permit statuses are handled in Acela. So for our tracking, but also so applicants can just go online and see just where things stand. If it's request for additional information, if that's the status, if the status is in completeness review, whatever the step of the process. So the Acela statuses will reflect the actual status of each application. This is generally happening right now, but not consistently for each step. And then these new procedures, it's going to be an ongoing process to kind of incorporate that into staff training and the staff performance management system. This is kind of trying to really push for increased consistency and a customer service focus. Is a little bit of a change. It's been very kind of individualized over the decades for TRPA plan reviews, but the agency has grown and the type of development has grown to a point where consistency has become very important. At least that's what I heard early in the process. So I think that is my last slide. Next up, Jen, if you could. That's my last slide on the administrative improvement kind of category. The next category are small applications. We have a minor application with capital letters, but also things that are relatively easy. What we're basically trying to respond to is a lot of people said, hey, some of these big projects, they're always going to be very difficult. But if you can make the routine things that everyone has to go through quite frequently, if you can make that easier and quicker, that would be very big. So we focused on that. We have these 5 specific changes. I'll go through each of them that really simplify and shorten procedures for a whole category of application or several categories of application types. Next slide, Jen, if you could. I think minor applications are one of the bigger changes in the package that got approved. This is a significantly shorter review time than TRPA has had in the past.
Arlo, this is Jen. It looks like your video and
Kind of
audio
dedicated
cut out for a
review.
second. There you are.
We have some dedicated review teams who will be reviewing these minor applications. And we're going, we've drafted up standard findings. So applicants don't need to do a findings analysis. These are the types of applications that are generally going to go through quite smoothly without major issues and findings and things like that. So probably the biggest category is a site and building improvement. If you're doing a home addition or some, site improvement project, fairly straightforward. To be a minor application, it has to be consistent with these to weed out the more complex areas, the more sensitive sites. So single parcel application. The second one is basically home addition could, or revision to a permit for a new house could be minor. It has to be residential, mixed use, or tourist land use. Can't do it in the shore zone or shoreland. Sorry, folks. I know there was some discussion of trying for that one. We're not allowing new or relocated sensitive land coverage to be minor. That would kick it into a regular application. Additional building height findings kick it into a regular application, as do non-conforming structures or uses. But essentially, if you can meet these 7, the review time is cut almost by 2/3. Next slide. Other types of minor applications. Grading is probably a big one. We got a lot of input on that. So we've increased grading thresholds up to 10 cubic yards on sensitive, or 50 cubic yards total could go through minor application. Equal area, really simple lot line adjustments are okay. Development right banking transfers, conversions, coverage, but non-sensitive land coverage, ADUs, historic, and some other less frequent application types. So we think this might catch, I don't know, 1/3 of the applications will now be on this expedited timeline. Next slide, please. Next up are the bundling of applications. Some of you I know have gotten timelines kind of slowed down because maybe you have to do a development right transfer and then do a project, or maybe a lot line adjustment and then a project. There'll be a new checkbox on the application forms where you can request the bundling of applications. So that would involve a concurrent review and coordination. Ideally, they'll be assigned to the same staff member. On occasion, there'll be a different staff members, but they'll be coordinated. So this should speed up the timeline necessary for projects requiring multiple types of approvals. Next slide. Our next category is exempt and qualified exempt. More of an administrative improvement. When you look at the qualified exempt language in code, it's really not supposed to be a TRPA review and approval. It's a property owner declaration saying, I understand these are the limits. Here's my project. It's within these limits. I promise to not exceed them. So we are implementing a process to reflect that. So QE declarations are not going to be individually reviewed. You're not going to get an approval letter. They're going to be accepted as property owner declarations. Code enforcement will be looking through them to make sure, stuff that shouldn't get built under QE isn't getting built. But that's going to save a whole bunch of staff time that was being spent with no associated permit fee or funding mechanism to support that work. We also moved a number of, well, as many as we could, categories of
Arlo, this is Jen. If you can hear me, your audio was cutting out for a moment.
types of work that requires a BMP plan or a mitigation fee to avoid really impacting those programs. So the changes to QE versus exempt are fairly modest. Although on grading, we were able to go fully exempt up to 10 cubic yards on non-sensitive land only. But the 3 cubic yard kind of standard grading exemption is retained for sensitive land. Next slide, please.
Arlo, this is Jen. I just wanted to let you know there's been a few times throughout the presentation where your audio has glitched just slightly. You may want to try turning off your video as we're presenting.
Hi, folks. Am I frozen?
Nope, we can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can. Okay. I can
There you go.
continue on if you can advance the slide.
Wonderful. So I was just mentioning to you, Arlo, there's been a few times where your audio has cut out very briefly. I think it may be a good idea if you turn off your video, it may help.
I will do that. Okay, now you're hearing from the dark screen. Kind of the next category of streamlining is historic resource protection. Some of our more significant proposals for this didn't make it through the process, so the changes are fairly modest for historic resources. In particular, delegated permitting for eligible resources. We had suggested a staff review process for that. That's going to stay as a hearings officer process. We do have some streamlining in the details of how we do those reviews. In particular, the state historic preservation offices will not be as deeply involved in the routine matters. There may also be a there may also be some additional work on this topic, kind of as a separate planning initiative. The governing board had some interest in that. Next slide, please, if we could. Decisions delegated to staff. This is another biggie, especially the bottom half of this slide. For general applications region-wide, it's pretty limited. There's a few additional project types that wouldn't have to go to a public hearing. But the big changes here are for shore zone applications. Most of the shore zone applications, well, not the really impactful ones or notable ones, but piers and buoy fields and things like that are going to be a staff approval process moving forward as opposed to public hearings. What is being retained is the noticing and the opportunity for concerned neighbors to know of projects and get involved and appeal those. But this is a significant reduction in the amount of staff work needed for each application and time needed to get through. And it's really going to help us address some of the permit backlog that staff's been struggling with for quite a few years now. So again, piers and buoy field expansions no longer requiring public hearings, but they do still require public notification. Next up. Okay, so those are process improvements for fairly minor types of projects. Kind of our next category is we really wanted to clarify the code. There are a lot of things that are required that have been, identified through code interpretations or guidance memos over the years. And we tried to wrap those into the language of code. And we also established a process as new interpretations are identified moving forward to write those down in a code interpretation list so the public has access to those and to codify those periodically. So there are a number of standards. Land coverage is probably the biggest. And then we also have some process improvements. Again, I'll click through. If you could, Jen, advance the slide. I will click through the sections. The biggest challenge I found was in coverage. I mean, it's just really difficult. You have a fundamental development limitation that is not measurable when you go to the definition. So we really wanted to increase clarity on what is coverage, what isn't coverage, if it could be exempted coverage, all of that type of stuff. So a lot of these code amendments are in Chapter 30 and also in the land coverage definition. Each of these items should implement, it shouldn't be a major change for people. This should reflect the general procedures that have been ongoing, with a couple exceptions I want to call out. Where I have the two asterisks there in the middle, we were able to somewhat expand the coverage exemptions, kind of within the same overall aggregate limit. But for improvements like HVAC systems or electric vehicle chargers or solar, essentially you can do up to 30 square feet of that as exempted coverage in lieu of some of the non-permanent coverage standards. So it gets a little involved, but overall the coverage exemptions, there were just a few gaps in those, dealing with HVAC systems, for example. So we think this will kind of be a little bit of a relief valve for someone who wants to, underground their power and has utility boxes, or install a new cooling system, or whatever it is. So there are limits. We had to do this without a full EIS, but that is one expansion. All of these others are really clarifications of what qualifies. And in particular, we have some standard design options for pervious coverage or pervious decks. So if you meet one of those design options, you don't have to demonstrate infiltration. It's basically, it's okay. If you have more of an engineered system, showing that is also still okay. Fire defensible space, that's long been a coverage exemption that was just never written. Next slide, please. There's more, chapter 30, kind of how banking is handled of coverage. The off-site land coverage program is written down, and the standards for off-site land coverage. So really just a pretty detailed kind of clarification of coverage standards. Height, we have a couple clarifications there. This is really to get how people make sure everyone's doing things consistently. Roof pitches, multiple roof pitches. There are some old interpretations dealing with that. We've written into code. The building height on slopes, it kind of came to my attention that there were we weren't being entirely consistent in what we were requiring or not requiring to use that building height on slope option. This lays out a few basic design requirements that if you meet those design requirements, you can use that code provision. It's really as much about what we're not requiring there as what we are requiring. This was intended to kind of increase flexibility for design. And similar, the scenic quality amendments, there's been some variation on what different staff members require for window reflectivity and glazing in particular. This standard, it requires a little bit of a judgment call through the review process, but basically reflectivity limits should only be required if it's actually reflecting sun to the lake or to a reflected area. So a house in a tree covered area that isn't reflecting glare will not need to do more expensive tinted windows, things like that. Shore zone, a couple minor clarifications there. Next slide, please. Nothing too notable. Next up will be the definitions. And the biggest definition, if we can get the slide advanced, take a look at the land coverage definition. We tried to make it measurable. Whoops, can you go back one again, Jen? We have standards in the land coverage definition now. Whoops, one forward. There we go. We actually have measurable criteria in the definition now for what is not considered land coverage. Utility lids might be a big one. There were some inconsistency on how big of a lid was considered coverage. I think we went with 6 square feet. Fence post dimensions, wall dimensions, foundation dimensions, clarification on boulders, things like that. So for land coverage, kind of start with the definition, and the definition excludes certain land coverage categories. And then you go to chapter 30 if it is something that's included as coverage. We also have a rounding section here to clarify when you round up, when you round down, those types of things. Should be consistent with ongoing practice. And then a series of definitions for things that just weren't defined previously. Next slide. I'll move this right along. I know this gets kind of technical and dull and a lot of information. I think the next slide will start talk. Oh no, we do Saving staff time. We really wanted to free up staff time and reduce work on stuff that didn't add value, so we could accelerate timelines and do a better job with communication and things like that. And these two amendments at the top are really biggies for staff, that just a ton of time was going into things that really wasn't benefiting anything. The first is we'll no longer be holding this below the IPES line drawing when there are incentive allocations available. Just a total waste of time. They're redundant programs. They've been merged together now. And the second biggie is reducing the single family audit rate from 10% to 5%. So fewer delegated permits will get audited. This is really a huge time suck for TRPA staff and local government staff. And we can redirect that time to other efforts. And then we also have a code reference list with links. I'm sure all of you know the code references all sorts of different documents. Right there in the procedure manual, you can find links to each of those documents. Next up, now I think we have the budget and fee issue, and then we can go to questions and discussion. Fundamental issue for the department is the application fees for many years have not been covering application review costs. It's a real challenge. You know, staff struggled to keep up with reviews. The agency has struggled to properly fund the department. It just really created a bunch of consequences. So we are focusing on that budget shortfall primarily through process improvements. After really diving into this, we see a lot of opportunities for efficiencies, and we're focused on those. But even with that, there are a handful of known issues that just, there's no way we're going to get to cost recovery through efficiencies. So there are some fee changes here I'll go through. And longer term, we've established a system to monitor revenue and expenses for different application types. And the idea here is we will use that data in about 2 years' time to revisit application fees and potentially recalibrate certain fees to reflect review times. But we're feeling pretty good that with the fee changes that got approved and with the efficiencies that were approved and are being implemented, that hopefully the agency can balance the permitting budget with these changes. Next slide, please. So this is what the department budget looks like. It's not a good balance sheet for anyone who tries to maintain a balanced budget. Averaging a 30% fiscal deficit for the last several years. And last year looks like it was actually quite a bit worse, almost a 50% fiscal deficit. So this just isn't sustainable. It's causing the agency to redirect money that is supposed to go towards environmental improvements to support permit reviews, and we really need to address it. So we're focusing on trying to address about a third of the deficit through the fee increases that were recently approved, and trying to address the other 2/3 through the efficiency improvements that I've just kind of gone over. Next slide, please. So what this means for applicants, almost all of the biggest fee changes are for lakefront properties, for shore land and shore zone applications. That's 85% of the total. And then some more targeted adjustments that will apply throughout the region. If we could go to the next slide, I can kind of show what that looks like. So kind of generally applicable changes. One of the biggies is this noticing process as opposed to public hearings. There will be a 1.25 multiplier associated with projects requiring noticing, which is a reduction from the 1.4 or 1.8 that currently applies to those applications. We have a fairly minor change to tourist accommodation fees to align it with multifamily fees. It didn't make sense that timeshares were cheaper than multifamily units. QE declarations, the same fee will apply to all submittals. Some of them right now have no fee. And those last two items, parcel consolidation and repeat permit acknowledgements, those are also items that we do that don't have an associated fee, so those would have a $200 fee. A couple fee incentive adjustments the governing board approved. One is to remove the multiplier that currently applies in special plan areas. This is seen as a disincentive to improvements in the areas we want redevelopment, and a fee subsidy for daycare facilities, which are kind of an important community need. Next slide gets into the shoreland and shore zone where the really significant changes occur. So lakefront applications will have mostly somewhat higher fees. That's the hit here. Shoreland scenic reviews represent about half of the fee overall aggregate fiscal impact. The $629 fee was just not covering it for these very complex, large lakefront projects. So that is approved to shift to a two-tiered fee system. The simple scenic reviews, level 3 or 6, are $1,000, and the more complex ones are $2,000. Probably, significant change. Mooring lottery eligibility reviews are going from $71 to $350. New buoys, just going to go to a standard $1,500 per buoy. Pier expansions are essentially being aligned with new piers in terms of fees. The review process is the same effectively. So pier expansions are going to see one of the bigger fee increases, where the fees you'll see on the table at the bottom, that's kind of the aggregate result of all this. All different flavors of piers are all going to be the same fee. It's basically all the same review process. The single family, kind of a typical beautiful lakefront house, sees a fairly modest fee increase. Pier expansion has a significant fee increase. And buoy field relocations also see a pretty decent increase here. So those are the big fee changes. Again, our hope here is that these fees, will be appropriate for the complexity of reviews, not excessive. This was our best guess at cost recovery based on what we know now, and this will be kind of tested and validated through the monitoring process. Next slide, please. Just about done here. So phase 3, we still have a little more work that we're doing kind of in this last piece, and this is kind of a preview of what we're focused on right now to roll out in March. Procedure manual, training and kind of implementing that, getting additional code interpretations documented, and refining those procedures. You'll see some placeholders for areas the document still needs work. And then really the biggie, and where we're spending most of our time, we're really diving into the application process now that we have kind of the basics set, and trying to improve that process. So that's really start to finish. We're looking at updating our application submittal requirements, clarifying what information is needed, eliminating things that are not needed, and really trying to make sure that the applications come in with the information necessary for TRPA to make a decision. And as part of that, really expanding the completeness review process to check for more details. Are those application submittal requirements addressed? So many of you may have, it may be a little trickier or more comprehensive getting through completeness review. But the reason we want to do that is we're really trying to minimize the need for these additional information requests coming later in the process. And so our goal here is to get all the information early, verify in the first 30 days that we have all the information, and then that will allow staff to move forward on a quicker review timeline. These new timelines that we're working towards really focus on what happens during the review process. We're planning to set in place a system where any preliminary reviews, we're calling it, so any requests for additional information or concerns about design, those should be identified in the first 60 days of the planner review. Sometimes those are taking, 90, 100 days for issues to be identified. So we want to accelerate that so it doesn't, delay the process at the tail end. And then for permits that don't need to go to a public hearing or don't need public noticing, We want those to be ready to issue on an 80-day timeline versus the 120, and also establish timeline standards for acknowledgement procedures of 7 days. And at each step of the process, we're working on systems for more proactive communication with applicants. For example, after the 60-day preliminary review, some of you may work, with local agencies where you have a type of staff applicant meeting. Basically, after 60 days, staff should be contacting the applicant. Hey, I went through your application. I have these 6 questions. I have these 2 concerns. Let's talk about it. Try to find a solution and move forward. So that's where we're really trying to take some of the efficiencies that we've gained through the approvals and convert that to a quicker, higher quality application review process. Next slide, I think, shows so the green stuff is approved. Minor applications go into effect in 10 days. And what we're working on, the improvements shown here in orange, is what we're working towards being able to implement in March, where the preliminary review step gets formalized. You can expect review comments in 60 days or 30 if it's a minor. Accelerate that permit issuance timeline for regular applications. And it'll still be 130 plus 120 for public hearings and noticing. And these timelines, it'll probably take about this amount of time. Everyone will still have opportunities to accelerate timelines through outsource review. But I think, you're not going to see minor applications issued dramatically quicker than these timelines. But we think this is achievable. It's going to take some additional preparation over the winter, but that's what we're working towards. I think my last slide is just questions. Again, all the information's online. We can probably drop the slide and turn it back to the group for questions, feedback, whatever you have. I'll try video again and hope I don't freeze.
Sounds good. Thank you, Arlo. This is Jen Self. Just wanted to mention for the good of the group, Allie helped us out and dropped the link to the Permitting Improvement Action Plan that Arlo's talked about. That is in the chat. So that's a hyperlink. And then that also has helpful documents on there. The table of amendments is a good resource just to see a snapshot of, okay, what were all the items that were covered today and what's actually changing. And then we'll make sure to send out some materials as well as the recording and that website to all the attendees today as well. But yeah, let's go ahead and open it up to any questions. If you could use the raise your hand button or drop a note in the chat, that'd be great.
Look at that, no questions.
I was just going to say, if you have any questions that come up to you as you're preparing an application or just curious, feel free to call us. We are all available and encourage any comments or thoughts that you have. So I want to again thank everyone for attending here today. I don't know if we had any other wrap-up thoughts, Arlo or Jen.
Yeah, I wonder, is everyone's kind of muted and frozen? Everyone good? Just wanted to make sure. Feel free to, as Wendy said, call us, use the customer service numbers, contact any of us directly. I do hope these are, tangible improvements and, that we can move forward with that next step. And I guess just in closing, one of the things that the governing board emphasized to us at our last 2 appearances is that process improvements are a continuous effort. It's not like a project that you do and then it's done. And they're really interested in continuing kind of to look at areas where systems can be approved.
Thank you. And Arlo, it looks like we do have a few questions coming in through the chat. Let's go first to Christina Hill, if you want to unmute yourself.
Christina set up.
Hi.
Setting.
Hi.
Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for this informative production. But I couldn't find the tables of changes, the amendments.
If you
And said it
scroll
was under
down,
permitting.
yeah, if you scroll down, go to that permitting improvement project under permitting, and then just scroll down to the bottom, and there's about a dozen different document links right there.
Yeah. Permitting
them?
improvements. Okay. Well, I had two computers going. Now I only have one, so it's kind of harder to get going. But anyway, it's under permitting, and then you go to permitting improvements, and then what?
It's right there. Just scroll down. There's about a page of text and then a bunch of links at the bottom. I just checked it, and that link that Allie sent out works.
Okay.
as well.
And Christina, this is Jen Self at TRPA. I just dropped a direct link to the table of amendments in the chat, and we'll make sure to email that material on the website out after this meeting too, so everyone has that.
Okay, great. That'll be really helpful. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Christina. And then there's a question from Julie. She said, I had a quick question. When the 200 multiple acknowledgement fee, when does that apply?
So if you go through the whole, permit acknowledgement process, and typically this only occurs when a local government requires some type of adjustment to the plan, and then you need to come back and kind of get a adjusted plan set acknowledged by TRPA. That's when the $200 fee would kick in for that staff time to do the acknowledgement process again.
Perfect. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
And I don't see any more questions in the chat right now. It did look like a few folks were having trouble with the raise hand function, so feel free to just go off mute if you are having issues with that and ask a question if you have it.
Like a Benjamin Fagan?
Yeah, but it's a fake out. It's actually Natalia. Hi guys. Yeah, my quick question, when are the forms gonna be updated for all of the submittals, and when are those new forms gonna be available?
So they're the link that we've just been talking about. Preliminary versions of those are available now, but everything will be live. I think there's still some work going on in the application forms with the minor application checkboxes. The old forms will basically be replaced with the new forms after Thanksgiving, so you can go where you've always gone for that information. But if you want to look at it in advance, go to that permitting improvement page and the link we provided there.
Gotcha, thank you.
It'll basically look like the same application, but there's going to be a selection box saying I request minor application or I request bundling with these other applications. And that'll be a flag for us to send it into the quicker process or to try to get it into a coordinated review.
And that's a great point, from Natalia. Just a reminder to all of you, there's a lot of consultants on the line today that you submit TRPA applications all the time. If you have applications saved on to your own computer or the code saved onto your own computer, make sure right after Thanksgiving to go onto the TRPA website and download the new forms and new code and things like that.
Right. Not seeing any others here. All right, well, I hope all of you are getting a little break. I know everyone was slamming busy before grading season, and we were too, and hopefully we have winter coming pretty soon. Feel free to reach out with any more questions or suggestions, and I think we can call this a wrap.
Thank you, Arlo, and thank you for everyone's time today. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a wonderful holiday. Happy Thanksgiving.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.